Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Review. We're back onto the Scotch whisky now with something just a little bit different from, surprisingly enough, Tomatin, a distillery which we just cannot seem to get away from.
Yes.
But we are getting down to their quirky stuff now. Dave can give you a bit more on that. What are we looking at?
Well, Cu Bocan is Tomatin's peated expression. They first distilled this in 1988. You can still get the 1988 edition. This is not one of the age statement or single cask type Cu Bocans. This is what has become the kind of standard or entry-level Cu Bocan. This is matured in a combination of virgin oak, bourbon and ex-sherry casks for, well, indeterminate amount of time because, as I say, no age statement.
My guess would be not an awfully long time.
Long enough to develop a quite unique and interesting character. But peating is mild, 15 parts per million for those who are keeping track. What is that rated on a peatiness scale?
That's
like,
fairly light. That's getting down to things you'd consider moderately peated distilleries. That's sort of maybe... I think actually Highland Park is a little bit lower there. I did try to look it up, but all I was able to get in the whopping 5 minutes that I spent before we started up here was the really, really highly peated ones. So this is... It's restrained, I guess you could say. Restrained.
They're going for kind of an ephemeral sort of peat. It's meant to evoke the, I guess, fleeting nature of the Cu Bocan spirit beast.
It's an interesting... I mean, the Cu Bocan is, of course, more or less a beast of Bodmin, more rehash, of which there are probably instances of all over the world. A sort of mysterious... predatory beast which materializes and dematerializes based on...
There's so many of those kind of spectral or mysterious animals which have oddly become very, very absent now that everyone is carrying a high-def camera in their pocket.
All a bit camera shy.
Now we never
these
find
things,
them. Yeah, they've just disappeared.
Them and Bigfoot both. But anyway, the story of how the whiskey is actually made is possibly a bit more relevant. They do it in quite an odd way. Whereas there's peated distilleries and there's unpeated distilleries and there's completely bonkers distilleries like Springbank, which are perpetually making peated whiskey over on one end and then unpeated whiskey over in the corner here and mixing them together or whatnot. Tomatin has a fairly straightforward approach in that they are an unpeated style, but for sort of a few weeks of the year, they will just sort of convert the distillery. They'll turn everything off and on again, reboot it all up to make peated whiskey. And so they do. The whole thing just churns out peated whiskey for those few weeks of the year, and so Cu Bocan is made. They sort of turn into, very, very briefly, to a very rare example of a Highland peated whiskey distillery. Like they turn into Ardmore for a few weeks, and then promptly turn back. So this is something that's intrinsically batch made. It's not just batch blended, it's just batch distilled. So you could probably hone this one down to a few weeks of the given year that it was distilled, because it simply is not made for the rest of it.
Well, this particular Cu Bocan, the no age statement and a variety of casks, first appeared on the market in October 2013. Some of the other Cu Bocans have been matured in casks sourced from traditionally peated distilleries. They used peaty casks to add to the peatosity, the peatiness.
Sort of hurry them along, maybe. Yeah. That's interesting. It's not a unknown practice. We've seen that before, but it was from Wolfburn and other similarly extremely young distilleries wanting to give their immature whiskey a bit of a boost, you could say.
And depending on the depth of your curiosity and your bank balance, you can get a lot of the other Cu Bocans, the single cask sherry. Not single cask, but single cask style, either sherry or bourbon, or the good old 1988 first version.
Goodness, that must be getting pretty sparse these days. But
it's still out there, though. And this one, the sort of entry-level, the only one that comes in the handy-dandy 200ml bottle, of which I'm so fond.
So, nosing this one, I'm already slightly pleased, because I have a problem with all these distilleries that have kind of gotten on the fad of having a peated release. There's a pitfall that I think they are beginning to fall into, because Anok does, and actually that's quite a good one, Anok and a great many other things will do Glendronach of all people, and now do a peated expression, which we have reviewed. And that wasn't bad either. But there's a recurring problem in that they when they're doing a peated version, they think they go overboard with it. They think, right, we're an unpeated distillery, it's time to really go nuts on this peated version of our
make up
whiskey.
all those years of having no peat by putting a century's worth of peat into one.
The second thing they do is make them just ubiquitously young, almost like minimum bare bones, sort of probably 6 to 8 year old whiskey. And what you end up with is something that tastes and smells astonishingly peaty. That box is well and truly ticked. But in the race to make it really, really peaty, you completely lose any inkling of the distillery it came from. You get... I have this problem with Anox ones particularly. They do more than one release. The younger Benriach and the very young Glendronach ones, they all have this kind of a problem where they're very, very peaty and they're peat flavoured, and they're just almost facsimiles of each other because they're made in quite the same way, and it's very, very difficult to tease out any distillery character. There is Benriach, and they should be props to them for doing it right. They do a really good, I think, they're the Curiositas, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. Curiositas. 17-year-old, fully mature, fully peated release, and that is tremendous. All of these are the sort of slightly rinky-dink, here we've made a peated expression, it's 8 years old, it's very peaty, knock yourself out. Those are, I think, quite lacking. This one...
we have here is mild peat.
This one is fairly gentle.
You know it's peaty, you're definitely smelling it straight off, but...
This one smells at least as much like Tomatin whiskey, albeit young Tomatin whiskey. It's not making any attempt to hide that.
But there is some sherbety citrus and spice from the bourbon cask. There is some tongue-lashing sap from virgin oak. And there are some more mellow, dry fruits and spices, and a little bit of even some rubber, some vulcanized properties from the sherry. Yeah. Those three cask types are coming through strong and distinct.
It's smelling as much like a Tomatin whiskey as it is a peated whiskey, and that's good. That's what they should be aiming for. It should be a peat influenced style, in my opinion, not a peat dominated style, because there are very, very many super young peated whiskies out there, and they're really, really similar. I mean, Ardbeg is out there for people that want it, and I think they've pretty much got that. They've got that one pretty well honed in, and pretty cheap as well. So I think trying to replicate that is a bit foolish. This, on the other hand, I haven't tasted it in mine. This, on the other hand, smells promising. Yeah,
it's a busy nose, but it's not a cacophony. There's a lot going on, but it's not a jumbled mess, which is also pleasing.
I think you covered what's in there pretty well. I'm not teasing out anything in there that you didn't pick out there. So we'll move on to the palate. This was 46, wasn't it?
That's right.
So it should be at least approachable.
It is prickly, but at the same time light and delicate.
Yeah, it's again just like the nose made no attempt to hide the fact that it's pretty young. Neither does the palate. I think we are dealing with whiskey between 6 and 8, 10 on the outside. We're not dealing with old whiskey at all. No. Pretty jolly young. There is no lack of a burn on here. There's really almost too much burn.
I quite like that. It's a good brackish, briny, iodine-y, salty tang from the peat, but that is not overpowering and it's not lingering. It gives way quickly to... the front of the palate, I think this will improve with a bit of water. The front of the palate is really pretty good. It's a lovely... It is still mildly peated. Yeah. Cannot complain about the level of peat. This, I think, is fairly perfect. It's where it should... It's where they should have aimed for, and it's where they did. Yeah.
The peat is there, it's evident, it's nice, it's tangy, it's briny, but it's working in tandem with the Tomatin flavours. Yeah. The problem I have just at this stage in the proceedings is simply the alcohol component. It's attacking the back of my tongue just a little more than it maybe needs to.
That peat gives way quite quickly to, as I say, the characters of the wood. It's full of sap, it's full of vanilla, it's full of sweetness and some dry fruit. Did you
say there was some virgin oak?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's
coming through.
That's both coming through strongly and doing it a lot of flavours. That's filling in some what would be pretty big gaps in the flavour here that would otherwise be kind of glaringly immature.
You'd have the sharp, vibrant citrus of the young bourbon cask with the sort of the flatter, more drier spice and fruit of the sherry. The virgin oak is a good kind of intermediary.
I think whoever made the call for the virgin oak, that was an extremely good idea, because that one, I think without that sort of fresher, really, really full-on oak, there would be some really glaring, really raw gaps in the profile of this one. It definitely needs that and hugely benefits from it. I think it's going to respond to just a wee bit of water.
Yeah, I quite like the little bit of fire there. It's not a scathing, tongue-scourging kind of a fire. It's just warm enough and lively enough to, this is young whiskey, there's a lot happening here. So it's an experience, it's invigorating without being overwhelming. But little water certainly cannot hurt.
That's weird. That's both made it sweeter and smokier. Sweeter on the tip of the tongue, and then quite a lot smokier everywhere else.
That has brought out some fruit and a little bit of a smoke, but it's really enhanced the sherry cask flavours. I think there's a lot of drier fruitiness and some more subdued spices, some cinnamon and nutmeg.
Some of that wet wood is coming through as well. I would be fascinated if anyone knows and can let us know in the comments where the peated malt actually came from, or rather where the malt probably comes from a very similar source, but the peat will come from one of, a handful of locations, and I not actually game to say whether this is even mainland or Isla. It's tangy enough that it could actually be Isla peat, but like I say, I have no idea where they've gotten the peat in to do the to do this express run of malting. It is just a little tangy from what I normally consider Highland peat to be, and that's, Ardmore is the archetypical example of that one. Very, very dry, very sort of woody, very charcoaly.
Despite being quite a strong and clear peaty note, even with the addition of water, it's still balanced. It's very delicate. It's not so fine as to be watery and to wash off the palate straight away. It's not a heavy, sinus-assailing, lingering peat, bombardment on your tongue. It is right in the centre. You taste it, it stays around just long enough, then it goes, leaving you a clean, crisp finish. It doesn't linger unwelcome lengths of time. It's just, it's a real kind of a masterpiece of a whiskey that is balanced just right to not be too fresh or too much of an unwelcome.
I agree with you in terms of how they've managed the peat. The peat is very good. That one definitely ticking that box for me. And I think the water helps the palate out dramatically. It's much more of it's more giving and more playful and vibrant palate with that water in there. It's just much more bouncy. There's much more going on. Where I'm having trouble is that it just still tastes really quite young. There's just a bit of lack of maturity going on, and I maybe wouldn't mark quite so hard, except that Tomatin, all the Tomatins we reviewed have been so ubiquitously good. Tomatin has proven that they can produce a no-age statement whiskey. In the case of their Legacy, which you can look that one up on the channel, their Legacy was a no-age statement, albeit unpeated, blend, to act as the entry-level one, and that was still fully mature. There wasn't these sort of immature gaps in particularly the palate that I'm detecting here. I don't know, this one tastes even younger than that one, which is very, very typical of these peated releases. They are just, to a T, just about the youngest whiskey that a distillery produces. And there'll be various reasons, because one, if people are buying peated whiskey for the peat, they're not massively concerned about the age. The peat is good to go from distillation, really. That's where it comes from, and you only lose it year after year on that. So if people are coming to this for the peat primarily, then get it fresh when it's at its most keen. But I'm not really a huge peat guy. I like it, but I like it in terms of how it really dances with the flavours of whiskey that's already there and is already mature, and it's just a hair too young for me. I don't know.
For me, I think the balance is really good. It's It's a noticeable but not overwhelming peatiness, and it harmonises nicely with the comparatively quite young whisky. Neither one outweighs the other, so you get all the liveliness, the sort of energy of the young whisky, with just a bit of peat to spice things up a little and add some, some enigma, some curiosity to it. And I think it's been done very nicely. It's a really good balanced.
Yeah, I think
exercise.
I don't want to fault it in terms of how it handles the peat. I think it's done that really, really well, in a way that a lot of other distilleries that make a peated release fail to do. It's whoever's in charge over there has understood that if you're buying Tomatin peated whiskey, some people are going to want to taste Tomatin whiskey as well as the peat. And in that respect, they have succeeded. I think if this was maybe just 1 year older on average, I think it would be towing way better in terms of how it really speaks to me.
There are age statement Cu Bocans out there, so who knows?
That maybe is something. How old are they? Are they 12 or
10 and 11? I'm not the 1988 version. I'm not sure how old that is.
So I think even 10, I think would have solved all of the problems that I have with this one. A guaranteed 10. So I might seek those out next time I'm
they're certainly available.
Next time I'm on the prowl and see if we can dip into that, because I think we might see a marked difference.
Yeah.
As far as this one goes, scores wise for me, it's as I said. I think it handles the peat really well. I just think it's maybe cut a few corners in terms of waiting for the whiskey to mature to get it into the bottle. So it's only going to be, it's a 78 from me.
Wow.
Just not quite, it's gets really, really close to the finish line and then just whoops, because the whiskey, wasn't old enough for my palate. It just wasn't fully mature. But in terms of the philosophy behind it, I think it's got a good idea. I just think they maybe cheaped out on the maturation. But I gather you're going to go a wee bit higher. I think this one's speaking to you a bit more.
This is among my favourite Tomatins out of the few we've tried so far, and I'd rate it an 87. The use of a generous but restrained peatiness and a combination of interesting cask styles and a fairly young whisky means there are so many strong, clear flavours and aromas in here. It's a real, I'd say, properly balanced bouquet of whisky styles, whisky flavours. That's still distinctly Tomatin, but just a little bit different too. So it's a great addition to the lineup, and just a very good and a well-priced whisky on its own.
Well, there you have it. I think scientifically proven. Tomatin Cu Bocan mileage may vary.
Yes.
It will speak to different drinkers depending on their individual styles.
It would be a boring whisky if everyone had exactly the same take on it. So,
certainly one to have a wee look at, especially if you can find one of these wee bottles here, which won't run you a great deal of money.
Curious,
as well.
but you don't want to commit. Then 200ml. Good sample size.
Good to see them making those wee bottles as well. Especially for reviewers like us, which don't want to. I mean, if we got everything, even if we got sent it, not that we're that popular, we'd end up under this ocean of whiskey.
Yeah.
These smaller bottles are more use than the 20ml, hotel bottles, because those are they're just a bit stupidly small. These ones, you can actually revisit something if you need to.
You can share them with your friends and try them more than once.
You've got a sensible amount of whiskey without ending up under way too much. So I think, I'm an advocate of these. I mean, cost effective, they're probably not. Those corks aren't.
You pay more per milliliter for your whiskey.
Obviously, the corks don't grow on trees, but literally they do. Right, we're getting silly now. We've gone on to. I've disabled myself with my internal cork thing. Anyway, losing it. Slanger. This has been Tomatin Cu Bocan, no age statement, peated. We hope you found that informative. I think it did. Between Dave's score and mine, you'll find your way somewhere in between. So I've got it back. Find your way in between one of those, and do let us know what you think about it, because this is. I think we're going to see more, not less, of these whiskies in future, and it's going to be quite an important thing.
If you tried one of the special or vintage releases of Cu Bocan, let us know what it was like. Recommendations, thoughts, opinions, concerns. Please do tell us. It'd be good to inspire our next Tomatin venture.
Yes, indeed, and guaranteed to have one sooner or later. All right, thanks for sticking with us. Stay safe, Slanger. Said it again, but never mind. It's one of those reviews. We'll be right back.